the spring of 2005, the city of Toledo, Ohio, was in a state of quiet decline. Once a hub of industry, the city had begun to show its age, with shuttered factories, worn-down neighborhoods, and empty storefronts scattered across its streets. It was the kind of place where life moved at a slower pace, where neighbors still recognized each other, and where teens hung out under the glow of streetlights because there wasn't much else to do. 17-year-old Daniel Brooks was one of those teens. By all accounts, Daniel was an ordinary high school senior. He wasn't a troublemaker, didn't run with a dangerous crowd, and wasn't the type to vanish without warning. His teachers described him as quiet, but determined, a kid who worked part-time at a hardware store to save for community college. Friends said he liked basketball, music, and had a dry sense of humor that caught people off guard. He wasn't remarkable in the way that drew attention, and yet, in the years to come, his story would haunt Toledo like a shadow that never faded. On the evening of April 14, 2005, Daniel left his home around 7:30 p.m. He told his mother, Linda, that he was heading to meet a friend at a local diner and promised he wouldn't be late. He wore a gray hoodie, a pair of jeans, and his old sneakers, the same ones he wore almost every day. His younger sister, Emily, remembered watching him walk down the street from the window, disappearing into the twilight under the hum of the street lights. That was the last time anyone in his family saw him alive. At first, his absence didn't set off alarms. Daniel wasn't known for staying out past curfew, but it wasn't unusual for teenagers to lose track of time. By 11 p.m., however, when his phone calls went unanswered, his mother began to worry. By midnight, her worry had shifted into panic. Daniel hadn't shown up at the diner. His friends swore they had never made plans to meet that night. No one at school had seen him earlier in the day act unusual. There was simply nothing. No argument, no note, no reason why he would vanish. By the next morning, the Brooks family had contacted police. Officers initially treated the case as they often did with teenagers. Maybe he'd gone to a party, maybe he'd run off for a few days. But Linda insisted this wasn't like her son. His wallet and ID were still at home. His textbooks and school notes were stacked neatly on his desk. His graduation gown still hung in his closet. And his bed, untouched, made it clear he hadn't returned home at all. Police questioned friends, classmates, teachers. No one could provide a lead. There were no security cameras on Daniel's street, no recordings of his path. All investigators knew was that he had walked down the block, crossed under the yellow-orange haze of a row of old streetlights, and then he was gone. In the weeks that followed, volunteers formed search parties. Flyers with Daniel's photo, a shy smile frozen in his senior portrait, were stapled to utility poles, taped to storefront windows, passed out at gas stations. His mother appeared on the local news, pleading for her son's safe return. But the tips that trickled in led nowhere. A possible sighting in a neighboring town was quickly dismissed. An abandoned house was searched, but yielded nothing. By summer, the city seemed to move on, but the Brooks family did not. Linda kept the porch light on every night, a beacon in case her son somehow found his way back. Emily grew up with the silence of an empty chair at the dinner table, and neighbors whispered their theories. Some said Daniel must have run away. Others believed he had been abducted. None of it brought answers. And as weeks stretched into months, the case of Daniel Brooks slipped into the growing list of unsolved disappearances in America. What no one could have imagined was that the very lights Daniel disappeared beneath would one day hold the key to the mystery, a truth hidden in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. When Daniel Brooks was first reported missing, the Toledo Police Department treated the case like countless others involving teenagers. Maybe he had argued with a friend. Maybe he had skipped out for a few days. In 2005, the assumption was always the same. He'll come back on his own. But Linda Brooks refused to accept that explanation. She knew her son. Daniel wasn't reckless. He wasn't impulsive, and he wasn't the type to vanish without telling anyone. By the second day of his disappearance, she was already on the phone with every friend, every relative, anyone who might have seen him. No one had. Police began a formal search in the neighborhood. Officers walked the blocks near the Brooks home, checking alleyways, abandoned garages, and vacant lots. Volunteers from the community joined in, combing through nearby woods and riverbanks. Search dogs were brought in, but the scent trail ended abruptly only a few blocks from Daniel's house, near the row of old streetlights where he was last seen. Flyers were printed by the hundreds. Daniel's senior photo, the one with his hesitant smile and slightly too big jacket, was suddenly plastered across Toledo. His face appeared on lampposts, in shop windows, on the corkboard of every grocery store. Local news ran the story for several nights in a row, showing footage of volunteers in orange vests sweeping fields with flashlights. But as days stretched into weeks, hope began to fade. There were no credible tips, no witnesses who could place Daniel after he left his street. Even the searches grew smaller, volunteers gradually returning to their own lives. By midsummer, the official investigation slowed to a crawl. Detectives admitted privately there was little evidence to work with. No signs of a struggle, no discarded belongings, nothing. It was as if Daniel Brooks had stepped off the face of the earth. For the Brooks family, the silence was unbearable. His mother kept calling his phone long after the battery had died, listening to the empty voicemail greeting as if her son might somehow pick up. His younger sister refused to walk past the street where he'd last been seen. The search for Daniel had begun with urgency and hope, but by the end of the summer of 2005, it had already started to settle into something colder, a case with no leads, no progress, and no answers. By the fall of 2005, the search for Daniel Brooks had all but faded from the headlines. What began with urgency and hope slowly slipped into the background noise of a city where too many tragedies already competed for attention. Toledo police still kept a thin file with Daniel's name on it, but to his family, it felt like the case had been pushed to the back of a drawer and left to gather dust. For Linda Brooks, Daniel's mother, time did not move the way it did for everyone else. Each day stretched out like an echo of the night her son disappeared. She refused to change his room. His textbooks remained stacked on the desk. His graduation gown still hung in the closet. The posters on his wall, the faded ticket stubs from basketball games, the collection of scratched CDs. All of it sat untouched, preserved in the hope that one day Daniel might walk back through the door. Every April 14th, Linda placed fresh flowers on the porch and left the light burning all night, a ritual that became both a comfort and a wound. Neighbors whispered about her refusal to move on, but she didn't care. Moving on felt like betrayal. His younger sister, Emily, grew older, with a shadow always just behind her. She entered high school in the years after his disappearance, walking the same halls where his classmates once carried his photo on flyers. Teachers who had taught Daniel gave her sympathetic looks, as if her very presence was a reminder of the boy who never came home. By the time she graduated herself, her brother's case had already become a quiet legend among students. The senior who vanished, the mystery no one could solve. Detectives rotated in and out of the missing persons unit. Some made promises, reopened files, ran down cold lids. A truck driver thought he'd seen Daniel hitchhiking in Indiana. A woman swore she'd spotted him in a mall food court in Michigan. Each lead fizzled into nothing. The file grew thicker with dead ends, but the truth remained as distant as ever. As the years passed, technology advanced in ways that seemed cruel to Linda. Social media filled with faces of kids broadcasting their lives to the world. Cell phones now tracked people down to the exact block. Surveillance cameras captured every corner of the city. And yet, none of it could reach backward to that night in 2005, when her son stepped out into the dark and never returned. By 2010, 5 years had passed. The Brooks family still gathered at the dinner table with one chair empty. Linda still spoke about Daniel in the present tense. Emily, now in college, carried the weight of being the one who stayed. Life moved on, but always with a limp. The city of Toledo, meanwhile, changed in its own ways. Factories closed, storefronts emptied, entire neighborhoods seemed to hollow out. On the block where Daniel vanished, the streetlights that once flickered over his path were replaced one by one with newer, brighter models. Yet a few of the old lamps remained, tall, weathered poles with rust along their bases. They were relics from another time, unnoticed by almost everyone. Almost. Each year, Linda petitioned the police to do more. Each year, she wrote to city officials, asking them to keep Daniel's case open. Her persistence kept his name alive in local memory, but little else. By 2015, the case was labeled what no family ever wants to hear: inactive, pending new information. Still, she refused to let the silence win. She kept a binder filled with newspaper clippings, police reports, and handwritten notes. Emily described her mother's life as living inside the case, unable to set it down. Some friends drifted away, unable to handle the constant weight of grief. Others stuck by her, attending vigils and memorial walks that dwindled in attendance with every passing year. By the late 2010s, Daniel's disappearance had become a cold case in the truest sense. For many in Toledo, it was just another name in a list of unsolved tragedies. For his family, it was a wound that refused to close. And then, in 2024, nearly 2 decades after Daniel vanished, the silence finally broke. It didn't happen the way anyone expected. There was no dramatic confession, no anonymous tip, no sudden breakthrough in technology. Instead, the answer came during routine city maintenance. Workers repairing one of Toledo's aging streetlights made a discovery so strange, so unimaginable, that even hardened detectives struggled to comprehend it. For 19 years, the Brooks family had lived in the shadow of absence. Now, they were about to be dragged into the harsh, bewildering light of truth, one that had been hidden in plain sight, hanging just above their heads the entire time. In the spring of 2024, Toledo's Department of Public Works scheduled routine maintenance on several of the city's older streetlights. Many of them had been standing since the late 1970s, patched together over the decades, their wiring outdated, their metal poles rusting at the base. Crews were assigned to replace bulbs, check wiring, and swap out a handful of the most deteriorated fixtures for newer, energy-efficient models. On the morning of March 22nd, a 2-man crew arrived on a quiet residential block not far from where the Brooks family still lived. It was an ordinary assignment. They parked their truck, extended a lift, and began unscrewing panels at the base of one of the lamps. The pole had long been scheduled for inspection after neighbors complained about flickering lights. When the workers pried open the base panel, they didn't expect anything unusual. But almost immediately, they noticed something that didn't belong. Scraps of fabric wedged among the tangled wires, brittle and discolored from years of heat and dust. At first they assumed it was trash shoved inside the pole, maybe by kids. But then one of them reached in with a gloved hand and pulled back something pale, fragile, something that looked like bone. The work stopped instantly. The crew called their supervisor. The supervisor called the police. Within an hour, the block was cordoned off with yellow tape. Patrol cars lined the street, and a forensic van arrived. Detectives pried open the rest of the pole, cutting away the corroded metal until the hollow interior was exposed. What they pulled out stunned even the most seasoned investigators: the partial skeletal remains of a human body, crumpled unnaturally to fit within the narrow space of the streetlight's base. Alongside the bones were fragments of decayed clothing, a pair of sneakers long out of fashion, and a cracked wristwatch frozen at a time that no longer meant anything. Word spread quickly. Neighbors gathered at the barricades, whispering in disbelief. Some had lived on that street their entire lives. Children had played under that light. Families had walked past it every evening. And all along, hidden inside, was the answer to a mystery that had haunted the neighborhood for nearly 2 decades. Within days, forensic analysis confirmed what many had already suspected. The remains belonged to Daniel Brooks. DNA testing provided certainty, but even before the lab results came back, investigators had little doubt. The shoes matched the pair his mother remembered him wearing the night he disappeared. The hoodie fragments matched descriptions from 2005, but if the discovery provided answers, it also raised questions so strange that the case immediately drew renewed attention. How had Daniel's body ended up inside a streetlight? The hollow space at the base was narrow, barely wide enough for wiring and transformers. The position of the bones suggested the body had been forced or collapsed inward, but no one could say how or when. Detectives reviewed old maintenance records. The streetlight had been serviced several times in the years after 2005. Workers had replaced bulbs, fixed wiring, and even repainted the pole, all without noticing what was hidden inside. The idea that Daniel's remains had been there all along was almost too surreal to believe, yet the evidence left little room for doubt. For Linda Brooks, the news was shattering. After 19 years of not knowing, she finally had an answer. But it was an answer that brought no comfort. "I used to leave the porch light on for him," she told reporters, her voice breaking. All this time, he was inside one. The story exploded across local and national media. Headlines read like something out of a nightmare. "Missing teen found in streetlight after 19 years." Reporters descended on the quiet neighborhood, broadcasting live shots of the now empty pole, its base covered in evidence tape. Commentators speculated endlessly. Accident, foul play, or something stranger. Theories swirled. Some believed Daniel might have climbed the pole himself, perhaps as a dare or an attempt to hide, only to become trapped. Others were convinced foul play was involved, that someone had placed him there deliberately, exploiting a hiding spot no one would think to check. Investigators refused to commit to either explanation, insisting the evidence was too degraded to draw firm conclusions. For the Brooks family, the discovery marked both an ending and a cruel new beginning. They finally knew where Daniel had been for 19 long years, but they were left with a question even more unbearable than his absence. Not just where he was, but how and why he ended up inside a streetlight that everyone had passed without a second thought. The hollow glow of Toledo's lamps, once just part of the city's background, now carried a new weight. For neighbors, each flickering bulb seemed like a reminder of secrets still hidden, waiting to be uncovered. And for the Brooks family, the light that once guided Daniel into the dark had become the very place that consumed him. The discovery of Daniel Brooks inside a streetlight did not bring the kind of closure many people expected. For his family, the revelation was both unbearable and surreal. After 19 years of unanswered questions, they finally knew where Daniel had been, but the knowledge raised more mysteries than it solved. Funeral arrangements were made in the weeks that followed. The service was small, intimate, held at a modest church not far from the Brooks home. Family, friends, and a few neighbors gathered, many of them older now, their hair gray, their children grown. They remembered Daniel not for the way his story had ended, but for the boy he had been. Quiet, kind, a teenager with his whole life ahead of him. Emily, his younger sister, spoke softly, her words trembling. "I grew up with an empty seat at the table. Now I'll spend the rest of my life wondering how he ended up there, in the light we all walked past every night." The case, officially reopened after the discovery, offered little comfort. Forensic experts admitted the remains were too degraded to determine a precise cause of death. No evidence of trauma could be confirmed or ruled out. Toxicology was impossible after nearly 2 decades. Investigators considered theories, but avoided public speculation. One possibility was that Daniel had entered the pool himself, perhaps as part of a dare or a moment of reckless curiosity. But those who knew him dismissed the idea immediately. Daniel was cautious, level-headed, the kind of teen who followed rules more often than he broke them. The notion that he would crawl into the base of a streetlight and never come back out felt absurd. The alternative, that someone had put him there, was darker, but no less baffling. How could a body have been hidden inside such a narrow, conspicuous space without someone noticing? How could maintenance crews have serviced the lamp for years, changing bulbs, replacing wires, painting the pole, without ever realizing what was inside? The unanswered questions ignited public fascination. News outlets across the country ran segments on the case. Online forums buzzed with theories, some practical, others spiraling into the bizarre. People wondered aloud if Toledo held other secrets, if other streetlights might hide similar horrors. City officials tried to calm speculation, but the idea lodged itself in the public imagination that the ordinary structures of daily life could conceal something unimaginable. For Linda Brooks, none of the theories mattered. What mattered was that her son's story had become something people whispered about, something consumed like a mystery rather than remembered as a life. She withdrew from interviews, refusing to feed the media frenzy. "He wasn't just a headline," she said once, quietly. "He was my boy." Emily, now an adult with children of her own, carried the weight differently. She pushed for Daniel's case to remain open, even if the odds of finding answers were slim. She wanted the file to stay on a desk, not buried in archives. "Even if we never know the how or the why," she explained, "I want people to keep asking." The streetlight where Daniel was found was dismantled and removed within weeks of the discovery. The city replaced it with a new, brighter fixture. For most residents, it was just another utility upgrade. But for those who knew the story, the empty patch of sidewalk where the old pole once stood felt like a scar, a reminder of a secret that had been hiding in plain sight. 19 years had turned a boy into a memory, and then into a mystery. Even with his remains returned to his family, the truth of what happened to Daniel Brooks remained unresolved. The silence of his disappearance had been replaced by the noise of speculation, but the core of the tragedy remained the same. A family broken, a life cut short, and questions that might never find answers. In Toledo, as night falls and the street lights flicker on one by one, some people still glance up at their glow with unease. Not because of the darkness they are meant to chase away, but because of the possibility that even the light itself can hide shadows too deep to understand.